Welcome inside the Dynasty War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 6 of the podcast. And on today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about free agency and some of the offseason moves that have already taken place as we lead into the free agency period starting this week. As always, if you have missed any episodes prior to this one, you can find them on any platform where you typically listen to podcasts. You can go ahead and find those Apple, Spotify, YouTube, you name it, it's on there. Go ahead and follow the show on whatever platform you do listen to podcasts on. And don't forget to subscribe to the show on YouTube at Dynasty War Room and on Twitter as well at Dynasty War Room. So those would help out the show a lot if you go and do that for us. We appreciate it. And we're just going to dive right into it today. It's going to be a little bit of a shorter episode than last week, for sure. It won't be as number-driven, so don't worry if you were a little bit inundated with too many statistics and numbers last week. That won't be the case on this episode. But there's already been a lot of news regarding trades and free agency signings, contract extensions, etc. So we're just going to talk a little bit about that. It is Sunday, March 10th, so the free agency, the legal tampering period does begin tomorrow. So we're going to have a very in-depth free agency review next week after all these big-name players, particularly a running back, signed contracts. But for now, we're going to talk about some of the players that were franchise tagged, that have already signed extensions, and some trade rumors involving, especially at the quarterback position. So we're going to actually start a little bit different today. We're going to start at the tight end position because that's where some of the more impactful moves were made over the past couple weeks. And I want to start with, there's really 4 guys in particular to mention today that have been in the news. So we're going to start with the 2 positive ones. And to me, that is Dalton Schultz of the Houston Texans and Hunter Henry of the Patriots. Both signed 3-year contracts with their respective teams to stay both in Houston and New England respectively. And I think that both of these players are being criminally undervalued right now in the Dynasty community, particularly Dalton Schultz, who is going as tight end 18 on Keep Trade Cut right now. He's behind Isaiah Likely, and I think that's crazy. This is a guy that has been ultra productive. He's tied now for 3 seasons to CJ Stroud in what should be a significantly above average offense. And this is, he's getting a 3-year, $36 million contract, 23.5 guaranteed. And I think he's somebody that you can acquire for relatively little. Like I said, he's going behind Isaiah Likely. This is somebody that can start for you, particularly valuable in a tight end premium league. So Dalton Schultz, somebody to target that you might be able to get on the cheap, especially if it costs something like trading Isaiah Likely straight up. I think that's a no-brainer move for either a contender or a rebuilder, because I'm not sure that Isaiah Likely, by the time he turns into a valuable enough asset that you can start, I don't know that he will be at a young enough age to where it would be even worth it for a rebuilding team. So at least Dalton Schultz, while he is a little bit older, he is somebody that, he's still in his 20s. He's going to be a high-quality starting tight end in Dynasty for the next at least 2 and probably all 3 years of this contract. Now, the other guy we talked about was Hunter Henry of the Patriots, a little bit older, approaching, age 30, but 3-year contract. He got a little bit more money overall on his deal than Dalton Schultz, $37.5 million, but he did get less fully guaranteed at $15.8 million guaranteed. So it's probably really more of a 2-year deal for Henry in New England, but still, I think he's a little bit undervalued. He's tight end 32 on Keep Trade Cut, behind Noah Gray. Hunter Henry's a starting tight end. He's going to have a new quarterback with Mac Jones being traded today to Jacksonville, and it's going to be an upgrade at QB. It's hard to be worse than the situation last year, whether it be Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi. But with the number 3 overall pick, the Patriots are likely to draft either Jaden Daniels or Drake May, and both of those guys would be huge improvements upon the quarterbacks that Hunter Henry was dealing with last season. So, and this is a guy that did have a couple big weeks at the start of the year. So I think he still has some left in the tank. If you make a move for him, I don't think it's going to be necessarily as your number one tight end in Dynasty. But if you're talking about a number two, number three, a depth guy to have to start on some bye weeks, particularly in tight end premium leagues, which I think are, the best way to play, Hunter Henry could be a low-cost option that can really provide your team with some solid depth. Now, two other tight ends that have been in the news over the past week or so. One is Jaxon Smith, who just signed a 2-year deal worth $10 million with the Miami Dolphins. Not an awful landing spot, but, this is something where I would be looking to trade Jaxon Smith away. He's probably not going to have anywhere near the type of role in this offense as he did with Atlanta in the Arthur Smith show. So Miami just doesn't really utilize the tight end position in a way that is great for fantasy. And I don't blame him. If I had, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle on my team as well, I'd probably be focusing on those receivers first. And they have some good running backs. So Jaxon Smith, probably a trade-away target, pretty much for whatever you can get. But I think from this is a situation where he probably helps the Dolphins more in real life than he is going to be a help to your fantasy team. So given the production that he did have this past season, you might be able to get something for him, a third-round pick, something like that in a rookie draft. So that would be a move that I would be looking to make. And the fourth tight end that I wanted to mention is Darren Waller. So no new contract for Waller, but he has been in the news because there's been some talk about retirement. He's apparently contemplating, taking some time off and just retiring from the NFL, which would be awful, of course, for his dynasty value. He's still, young enough. I believe he's 32, so it's, he has a couple years left on his contract. It's not a situation where he needs to retire or he's not completely ineffective, but, injuries take a toll. He's been banged up and he might just, have had enough. So while he's still on a roster and before he's made that decision, it's a little bit of a tricky situation for fantasy managers because with these rumors, you're probably not getting much for him in a trade because, of course, why would anybody want to acquire him if there's, the threat that he wouldn't play? But at the same time, this is a window where you might be able to get something for him, like just anything at all, which could be better than being stuck holding the bag if he does retire. But to me, this is a situation where I don't know that he actually will retire. I do think he returns for one more season, but even with that fact, Darren Waller was a sell for me long before the retirement talk came up. Declining in production, injuries, he's getting older, on a bad offense, big questions at quarterback, whether it's Daniel Jones or someone else next year. And I'd be looking to move Darren Waller for, like I said, almost anything you can get. To me, the ideal trade target is trading for Noah Fant, who is valued roughly the same on Keep Trade Cut. He's actually one spot below Darren Waller, but he is younger. Noah Fant is a free agent, so he will be signing somewhere this week. So to me, that is a move that I'm willing to make. Darren Waller still has the name value, and you might be able to get something for him. Noah Fant has some potential here in free agency. Hasn't really done a lot in his NFL career after being a first-round pick and, pretty highly touted coming into the league. But there is some potential there, and I would make that move 10 times out of 10. I think Noah Fant is worth more than Darren Waller in Dynasty right now. So I don't know if I'd be trading him for, a late fourth-round pick, so don't take when I say trade him for anything too literally. But if you can get a third-round pick for him, I would do that. Just anyone younger that you think has some sort of potential where, Darren Waller probably not going to provide you much of anything. Even if you're a contender, I don't know that he'd be anything more than, a tight end 3 for your team. So Darren Waller, guy that I'm ready to move on from. Next up, we'll talk about some wide receivers. The free agency class is not great at this position, and that's primarily because all of the higher-end receivers that would have hit the market have been franchise tagged or already signed new contracts. So the players that fit that specifically are T. Higgins and Michael Pittman, along with Mike Evans. T. Higgins, Michael Pittman Jr. both received the franchise tag from both the Bengals and the Colts. And I think that both of those situations, if they stay on their teams, are great. T. Higgins, I think, probably provides you with the most value if he stays in Cincinnati. Because if he does get traded, I don't think it's going to be to a contending team for, I don't think he's ending up in Kansas City or, any type of Buffalo, a high-powered offense. Given the cap issues and the need to sign him to a huge extension, I don't really see that being the case. But if he stays in Cincinnati on the one-year deal, I do think that he'd provide some pretty solid production for you, assuming that Joe Burrow is healthy. And earlier this offseason, we did our buys and sells episode, and T. Higgins was a sell. But since then, his value has dropped so much. He's dropped about 10 or so spots on keep trade cut at the wide receiver position, which to me almost puts him at a point where he could be a buy. I mean, he's going for, a late first, roughly, maybe mid to late, something like that. I think I would be willing to trade the 109 for T. Higgins. I don't know that I would move a top 8 first round pick, but if you can acquire T. Higgins for a pick in that 9 through 12 range in the first round, I would certainly consider that. You could acquire T. Higgins for Jaxon Smith-Njigba straight up. I would make that move as well. I think that the signing of Tyler Lockett, who we'll talk about in a second, does hurt JSN a little bit. So if, while JSN still has some pretty elite value, that could be a move that you consider making as well. So T. Higgins, great if he stays, very high risk if he is traded, which certainly is a possibility. I think if he ends up in a place like Carolina, that would, or New England, that would really stink for his value because of the unknowns at the quarterback position. I don't trust Bryce Young. I'm not sure that I would love the fit with any of the rookies if he goes to New England. So that's just something we'll have to watch and see what happens over the next, couple weeks. But I do think he probably stays in Cincinnati. The same goes for Michael Pittman Jr. I think he stays with the Colts. And I don't really think his value is affected too much by this. I do think that they probably will work out some sort of long-term contract. But again, there is the possibility that he is traded, which could hurt his value depending on the landing spot. But I like Michael Pittman Jr. more than T. Higgins. So again, if you can trade a late first for him, I would do that as well. I think if he stays with the Colts, that connection with Anthony Richardson, who will be back from injury, could be a very good one. And I just think that Pittman has shown, the steady, consistent production to a little bit more of an extent than T. Higgins. T. Higgins also has had more of an injury history, so that certainly plays into that as well. But Michael Pittman Jr., he's somebody that I like. I think he's a hold in Dynasty. I don't think his value is changed dramatically in any way by receiving the franchise tag. Mike Evans was a pending free agent if he had not been signed to a new contract by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which he was. 30-year-old, he gets a 2-year deal worth up to $52 million, $35 million guaranteed. This is a great deal for Mike Evans, and I think it's a great sign for Baker Mayfield, who is a pending free agent. And I think it's great for Dynasty because I think Mike Evans sticks around for both years of this contract. I think you get at least one more year of high-level production, probably 2 as long as Baker Mayfield re-signs with Tampa Bay. And if you are a Mike Evans Dynasty manager, I would be holding him. I don't think this is an opportunity. Well, it is an opportunity to sell if you want to because his value is probably peaking right about now. So in that sense, if you are a rebuilding team, you can certainly sell for a late first-round pick. I would be really gunning to get the 108 or better. I'm not sure that would be possible, but I think similar to that mid to late first type of range would be ideal if you're a rebuilding team looking to capitalize on this new contract. And if you are a contender, I don't have an issue with going out, the 112 for Mike Evans, 110, something like that. Any of those picks in the late first or around the 1-2 turn should provide you with some pretty good value from Mike Evans over these next 2 seasons. Tyler Lockett, is another receiver that just signed an extension. Well, it wasn't really an extension. It was more of a restructure with the Seattle Seahawks, but it feels like an extension because I think a lot of people expected that Tyler Lockett would be cut, and that is not the case. So despite being 31 years old, he is sticking around in Seattle for 2 more years, $30 million total, and $13 million guaranteed in 2025. So he will be sticking around for both years of this contract. And this really hurts JSN, who I think, now you're probably stuck waiting another year, maybe 2, for that sort of elite breakout that you would be hoping for from him. I still think that JSN is a very talented player and certainly one that, has a high ceiling in Dynasty, but I just think you might be waiting a little bit longer than hoped for him to sort of break into that, top group of receivers. So if there are still people that imagine him as this, early first in a rookie draft, high level prospect, you could go out and trade JSN away. We mentioned that T. Higgins could be a good target. You could, there's probably a number of receivers in that range that you could probably get in a deal for him. So, and if you can get a pick, 107 or higher, even 108 or better in Dynasty, I think that would probably be a pretty good move to make, seeing if you can turn Tyler Lockett into Rome Odunze, or, one of these quarterbacks in the draft. If you're a quarterback needy team, something along those lines, JSN would be somebody that I would be looking to potentially move. But Tyler Lockett is an interesting guy in that he's just a steady producer. He did have a slightly down year last year, which is to be expected given his age and, some mediocre quarterback play from Geno Smith. But this is somebody you can probably buy with a third if you're a contender. And if you're a rebuilding team, I think if you can get a second for him, I think that's still possible in a lot of leagues, especially if it's a late second from a contending team. So something along that 2-3 turn would be a pretty solid return for Tyler Lockett if you're a rebuilder. And this contract, I think, gives him some, renewed life in terms of value moving forward. Jerry Jeudy's the other big name that has been in the news this week. He was just traded from the Denver Broncos to the Cleveland Browns. He's still just 24 years old. He has 1 year left on his contract, which is the 5th-year option of his deal that was picked up by Denver last year. He was traded for a 5th and 6th round pick. Not, that exciting of a return, and I think that kind of shows you what his value is. And Cleveland does seem to have a knack for these, late round pick for solidly talented receivers. We saw that with Amari Cooper. I say solidly talented. It's sort of a weird phrase. Can probably come up with something better. But the point being, I don't know that Jerry Jeudy is anything special at this point. I think he's kind of reached, he's really nearing a breaking point where he either will break out and have a great year with Deshaun Watson and thriving in that number 2 role behind Amari Cooper, or everything's going to fall apart. Deshaun Watson's going to stink. The Browns offense will stink. Jerry Jeudy will stink. And you're going to have missed your opportunity to sell him. So I personally am not a believer in the Cleveland offense. While I think it's a pretty good team overall, especially on defense, I'm not a Deshaun Watson believer. I think Amari Cooper is a great sell this offseason. Nick Chubb, I think, is pretty much done given his serious injury. And I would be looking to trade Jerry Jeudy away. If you can get a 2nd round pick for him, I think that'd be pretty fair on both sides given the risk reward involved. There's some upside for someone that makes a move. And I think getting a 2nd round pick in this year's draft gives you, a solid soft landing spot to draft a replacement with the depth at receiver in this rookie class. So Jerry Jeudy, I'm out on him, even though he's young. But if you're a team that is rebuilding, or just kind of stuck in the middle, this is a great opportunity to restart. And it does stink because he was such a highly touted prospect. If you drafted him in a startup, or not in a startup, in a rookie draft, you probably spent an early first on him. So that it's a bummer. It really is. But I think something important in Dynasty is recognizing when guys are pretty much out of value, and I think that's the case here. I would sell him while you still can. In fact, I would probably rather have Marvin Mims who will take over his role in Denver. That might be that. I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but I think they're probably valued pretty closely. So if you wanted to acquire Marvin Mims for a late second, early third, I think that would be a pretty solid move at this point. I don't know if that's going to happen because the people that drafted Marvin Mims are probably excited to see what he can do now. So it's probably somebody that you're not really going to be able to acquire unless you overpay and give something like an early second, which I don't think I'm willing to do, especially in this year's draft class and the depth at wide receiver. But Marvin Mims, somebody you can take a look at, see who has him in your league, and if it's a situation where they might be willing to move on from him. But in general, Jerry Jeudy, I'm out on him. I think I'm in on Marvin Mims, but not to the point where I would overpay. And Courtland Sutton is a name to watch now in Denver too, because there's been rumors about him being traded. If he does not get moved, he is still the number one receiver there in Denver. That's probably going to be a team that is really bad this year, going to be throwing a lot, trying to come back from big deficits. So it could be some sneaky value there from Courtland Sutton, but I would not be shocked if he is traded in the coming weeks either. So keep an eye out for that. The Broncos re-signed Tim Patrick to a one-year deal for essentially the vet minimum, who's coming off a back-to-back season-ending injuries. Not really interested in Tim Patrick, but if he's somebody you can probably pick up on waivers if you have an empty spot on your roster, go for it. But be quick to cut him if you don't see much in the first couple weeks. Moving on now to running back, where there really has not been much action in terms of pre-free agency stuff. Pretty much the headline is that nobody received the franchise tag at the running back position this year, which is a change from last season. And I think that makes sense because the franchise tag is starting to get around that 12 million mark for running backs. I don't know that anybody out there is going to receive that as a free agent. And, Saquon Barkley leading, the charge there at the position, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry. There's a lot of big names. Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift. You can go down the list. But, a name to keep an eye on, I think, is maybe a sneaky player in free agency here will be Antonio Gibson, the Commanders. Zach Moss is probably going to land somewhere as a solid backup or number 2 in a committee. But one general note on running backs, since we don't have any specific player news, selling free agencies at a high point in value when they sign their free agency contracts is generally pretty good process. I am not really trying to buy running backs at this point. Even after they sign these contracts, again, we want to wait until after the NFL draft because there is, a high likelihood that a team will sign one of these upper echelon free agent running backs, and then they're going to turn around and also draft the running back in the 3rd or 4th round, which, muddies the water a little bit. So we want to really see what the landscape looks like after the draft if it comes to acquiring running backs. So if you get, Saquon Barkley or Josh Jacobs or somebody signs with the Texans or the Cowboys or the Chargers or some landing spot that seems really good, the Bears are another team that could use a running back. If you get a massive offer or you want to shop them around a little bit and see what you can get, see if you can get a, top 6, top 8 pick in a rookie draft, potentially more. I mean, people will pay a lot for running backs. I think that's something both in my experience and a lot of other leagues, teams always need running backs. And so it might be something where if you are using like a trade calculator, you're going to probably have to overpay compared to a calculator to acquire a running back. And so that's something to keep in mind as well, both on both ends of a deal. But I would probably be looking to hold most of the upper echelon free agents. The only one that I think is really a hardcore sell is probably Austin Eckler. But then again, his value has dropped so much that you might not really be able to get a lot for him anyway. So in that sense, let's see where these guys land and then make more informed decisions about, what you want to do moving forward. But, selling or holding is generally good process on free agent running backs. At the quarterback position, it's going to be a really interesting couple of days here because we saw today, we mentioned that today is Sunday the 10th, and Mac Jones was just traded this morning from the Patriots to the Jags for a 6th-round pick where he will back up Trevor Lawrence. So that pretty much signals very clearly that the Patriots will be making some sort of move for a quarterback, whether it is with the number 3 overall pick or whether it's signing a veteran or making a trade for somebody like Justin Fields. Who knows? We will see. I think the right move, of course, is probably to just draft someone with that 3rd pick, but we have to wait a little while to see what happens there. Elsewhere in free agency, we're going to see Kirk Cousins, Baker Mayfield, Russell Wilson are the 3 big names that we'll have to see what they do. I think Kirk Cousins is a pretty good buy candidate right now. I think you can get him for an early 2nd. I think there's very high likelihood that he ends up either returning to Minnesota or going to Atlanta, which both would be great landing spots for Kirk Cousins. So I'd be excited about that. The only, there is risk in the fact that he's coming back from a very major Achilles injury. But if we believe that he comes back healthy from that, he's going to get a lot of money. He's going to be in a very good situation, both for fantasy and real life value. So he's somebody that I like. Baker Mayfield, I think the best move for all parties for him would be to return to Tampa Bay. Mike Evans is staying. I think he's a pretty good hold candidate. I don't know that I would be looking to buy or sell him, but if you have him already on your roster, I think just accepting that you probably got him for cheap, or maybe you're still holding on from taking him in a rookie draft years ago. But either way, I think holding on to Baker Mayfield is probably the right move. Russell Wilson, I think the best spot for him would clearly be Pittsburgh, and he did meet with the Steelers. He also talked to the Giants, and there's been some chatter about the Raiders being interested as well. I think the Steelers would be a great fit for him. That's going to be an offense where he's going to have George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth, and it sounds like Deontay Johnson is likely going to be traded. So we didn't talk about him in the receiver section today, but someone that he's probably out the window, headed somewhere else. We'll see what kind of trade looks like there. But Arthur Smith is somebody that obviously showed in Atlanta he's not great at running an offense, but he'll be doing it again here in Pittsburgh. So, that's a reason to hesitate a little bit, but he'd have some weapons. It would be a situation where he's on a good team that can make the playoffs. I really don't think Russell Wilson was that bad last year, particularly for fantasy purposes. He was pretty solid. So if, he's your 3rd quarterback in a super flex league or a number 2 even, I think having him as your 3rd QB is ideal, but he's somebody that you can probably acquire for relatively cheap, especially right now before he actually signs. You can probably get him for an early 3rd, something around that 2-3 turn range. And depending on what team he ends up on, that price is probably going to steadily increase leading up to the season. So now is probably the time to make a move. If, that's something that, if he's a fit for your dynasty roster, obviously if you're a rebuilding team, this is, both Cousins and Wilson are not players you want to target. But if you're a contending team or a middle-of-the-pack team looking to make that jump into the playoffs and you do need some depth at quarterback, I don't see any issue with adding Russell Wilson to your roster. So that pretty much does it for today's episode. We've talked a lot about players that have signed extensions or the franchise tag and various trades around the league. It's going to be a wild couple of days with the tampering period that starts on Monday. The league New Year begins on Wednesday, so that will be when deals can become official. But we will start getting a ton of news starting on Monday, March 11th. So keep an eye out there. I think one thing that's interesting to note is, typically you probably would not see a lot of value at running back in free agency because teams can just go out and draft someone. But this year's draft class being so weak at running back, you might actually see some of these guys sign deals. And at receiver, there's really not a lot. Calvin Ridley is the best option pretty much by far out there. We talked about Hollywood Brown from Arizona. He'll be a free agent. Gabe Davis. We're talking, once you get past those top couple names, you're talking about a washed up Michael Thomas, Tyler Boyd, who probably, I'm not sure that he's going to end up in a situation that provides you much more value than what he was with the Bengals. An old OBJ. I think a sneaky guy to look out for would be Darnell Mooney if he does end up on a team like the Chiefs. But other than that, not a ton of great options in free agency. You're going to see a lot of situations where guys sign, 1 or 2 year deals to be, third or fourth receiving options on a team that will be very helpful in real life, but won't really do much for your fantasy team. So just something to be in mind of, keep in mind as you see who gets what kind of deals this week. So that will do it for today's episode. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget to follow the show on whatever platform you're listening to this show on right now. It's on Spotify. Hit that follow button, Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to the show on YouTube. And leave us comments on Twitter, Facebook. We have a Facebook page now. Twitter. Go follow the show. And we're always looking for feedback and questions. And at some point, we'd like to do a mailbag episode where we answer some questions from the audience. So if you're listening and you made it this far, go ahead and leave a comment somewhere on social media. And again, thank you all for tuning in. And we will talk to you all next week after free agency concludes.